Quoting from Miss Electa Jones, Reverend Jonathan Edwards, born in East Windsor, Connecticut, October 5, 1703, was the son of Timothy Edwards, a gentleman of Welsh descent. It has been shown that the Church of Stockbridge was not only a missionary church, but that its early English members were of Puritan origin, and it has been blessed with pastors of the same holy stock. Jonathan Edwards commenced the study of Latin at the age of 6 and entered Yale College before he was 13 years of age. He received the degree of bachelor at 16, and after 2 years of further study at the same institution was licensed to preach the gospel. Like Sargent, the valedictorian of his class at Yale, he also spent 2 more years studying theology. His first settlement was with his grandfather at Northampton, February 15, 1727, having held the office of tutor at Yale from the spring of 1724 until the time of his call, September 1726. For several years he was much beloved, and after the death of Mr. Stoddard in 1729, he had the sole charge of the flock. In 1731, Reverend Edwards became the sole minister of the First Church of Northampton, which was one of the largest, wealthiest, and most prestigious congregational churches in the English colonies. Here he preached the fire of hell in the terrifying Calvinist way that was becoming unpopular. At the same time people wanted to hear that God was a benevolent spirit, Reverend Edwards put the fear of hell into the prosperous citizens of the Connecticut Valley farming community. It would not be a wonder if some that are now present should not be in hell in a very short time, and it would be no wonder if some persons that now sit here, in some seats of this meeting house, in health, quiet and secure, should be there before tomorrow morning. Reverend Edwards also opposed the halfway covenant, which relaxed requirements joining the church as a member. With no external hierarchy like bishops or cardinals, each church was independent and run by agreement or covenant. Under the halfway covenant, any person was admitted to the church who covenanted to lead a godly, good, and sober life. Reverend Edwards had great concern for the morals of the first generation born to the settlers. Covered with blankets, they enjoyed moonlit rides on hay wagons. Reverend Edwards could not help but notice a rise in children conceived out of wedlock. In 1750, when a group of young people looked at an obstetrics book, and Edwards preached against them and condemned them from the pulpit, the parishioners had had enough. The parents of the disgraced children had Reverend Edwards dismissed as minister of the church. The Reverend Jonathan Edwards was exiled to Stockbridge to be the second minister of the First Church of Stockbridge. 2 years after John Sargent's death, with no one to look after their interests, the Mohicans had left in large numbers. In 1751, when Jonathan Edwards arrived, there were only 18 white families. A store in the village had been built with government money and was selling rum to the tribe. Reverend Edwards, more of an intellectual pastor and writer, did not learn Mohican and preached through an interpreter. He defended the Stockbridge Indians' interests, but enjoyed the peace and quiet of the frontier. Quoting again from Miss Jones, President Edwards knew his books and his family, but never visited his people except in sickness, and did not know his own cattle. But he had not a happy talent at conversation, unless removed from all restraints, and consciously in the presence of true friends only. He seemed to be created expressly for the work which he accomplished, that of preacher and author. The people of Stockbridge were generally united in Mr. Edwards, and much attached to him. In 1754, Edwards wrote Freedom of Will while working at a 6-sided table for 13 hours a day. Before he left Stockbridge, Jonathan Edwards softened a bit. He preached that sin and evil were the absence of God, as if God were like the sun behind a cloud. The lack of God was to blame rather than an actual functioning devil. After only 7 years on the frontier, Edwards was called to become the 3rd president of Princeton College, also run by the Congregational Ministry. Mr. Edwards always controlled his feelings in public, but after he announced from the pulpit that he was leaving, he covered his face with his hands and yielded to the relief of tears. In late January of 1758, he arrived at Princeton. He served as president of Princeton for a few weeks. 7 weeks after his arrival, he died following a smallpox inoculation. Jonathan Edwards left 11 children.